afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, proudly powered by leadershipbydesign.co, where we aim to add value to people's lives. You can catch us live every Wednesday and Thursday on Lunchtime or at lunchtime on ebizradio.com and all your major podcast channels today. If you are seeing this or listening to this, I want to challenge you to add more value to someone's life today. We certainly need more people to add value to others and to be kinder to one another. With this in mind, joining me today, someone who's added a whole bunch of value to mine, and I've seen him in action as well. He's a TEDx speaker, leadership and development consultant, trainer, and coach, owner of Ready People, Clive Vanderwagen. How you doing, Clive?
Oh, I'm very good. All the better for being with you, Kevin.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining me on today's show.
Cool. It's good to be here. We're going to talk all sorts of things value.
Absolutely. I think we've crossed paths on a number of occasions now with clients, and there's a specific topic that I think you sometimes, I think you I don't know if you plan to be as funny as you are, but you have the knack of doing it. But I mean, before we get to that conversation, tell us more about Clive, and what do you do, and then from that, where do we move into, and what's the conversation today?
Okay, so I started a company called Ready People about 3 years ago. I actually launched in the February of 2020, and the world closed down a month later. So it was very interesting going out on my own then. But basically, I kind of came up with a one-line business plan, and that was just to make people better, but better in terms of relationships and performance, and to use the training skills that I had. I've worked in the training space for a number of years and then had moved into organizational space, then thought I would leave that and just try and add value wherever leaders were, wherever employees were, wherever people faced customers, and the business has just developed and evolved so it's become more of a leadership space that I work in now. I talk to people a lot about stuff that I see are releasing a book on soon, which is bringing humanity into business. And I think that's it's so important that we teach people to become more emotionally intelligent somehow. And I think that adding that value is incredibly important. So that's kind of what I've devoted my life to for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I worked in magazines, in journalism. I have run an acting agency, the biggest acting agency in Cape Town. So I made people stars. I have trained as an actor, and I have been a youth pastor for a church. So Kevin, I've done a bit of everything.
A youth, well, I don't know that part. That's a whole other. That's that comes with a whole bunch of patience. I'm assuming.
Podcast part 2.
Yes. So, Craig, I mean, in terms of
Clive, not Craig.
Did I say Craig?
You did.
Oh my goodness. It's because I just had a conversation with Craig right before you did. So Clive. The conversation that the reason why I wanted you to join me today is one of the conversations that you often speak about, that I often see you in, is around transactional analysis. And that's really, as you mentioned, the book as well, is that humanity part of the importance of what the future of work looks like. And I think that people are so bombarded with the artificial intelligence conversation that they forget that there's actual humans behind it, and also coexisting with the artificial intelligence. But I also think that a lot of people don't understand transactional analysis well enough. And I've been in conversations where where I've heard people say stuff like, "Oh, hi, how are you? Fine, and you?" And they do that kind of very loose small talk kind of approach, and someone once said that's not a transactional conversation. And I found that quite useful to kind of go, is there cognizance in when you're transacting with people? But I mean, I know about it. I'm not the expert; you're the expert. So please tell us, what are we chatting about, and what is transaction analysis?
Okay. So TA, I got introduced to about uh, 10 years ago now. I got introduced to a bunch of industrial psychologists who went into organizations, specifically in the call center space, and would teach call center agents to deal with customers or to work in the sales space and use models that were based in I'm also struggling to say it this morning, Kevin. Transactional analysis. And so and it really made sense to me from there. And I then decided to pursue it more and have moved into the organizational TA space, where it was developed in the 1950s by Eric Byrne, who was a Canadian psychiatrist, sorry, and he developed it as a theory and a modality of personality and relating to other people. And it was initially used for therapy and in a psychotherapy space, but has since moved into being used in the educational space quite significantly, and rethinking how we educate other people, and then organizationally, and how do we work together as human beings and do that differently. Transactional analysis is what you're saying, I hear, in terms of like when people say, "Hi, how are you?" What transactional analysis would say is that those are transactions that are happening. So every interaction we have with someone is a transaction. And but what transactional analysis looks at is, where does that come from within the human being? And sometimes when it's coming from that kind of robotic space, it's not coming from one which is going to move the relationship forward. So what we do is we look at ways of relating to each other. And I always say, in relating to people in a way that's going to move the relationship and the business forward. And that's how I use TA. It's kind of my underlying philosophy that says that we can, because TA says we're all okay as human beings. We just, sometimes we do bad things, but we aren't bad people. Obviously, there are exceptions to these. It says that we can all think, and that we have wisdom to find solutions, and also says everyone can change. So that's the basic tenet that underlies transactional analysis. And from there's various modalities that you can draw on, from ego states, which a lot of people know about, the parent, adult, child, but it goes a lot further than that into working with how do we shift culture, how do we shift structure, using these kind of models and using a language, because TA is quite a nice language that's very cringe free, but also makes people kind of speak a language that they understand, and doesn't sound emotionally motivated. It comes across based in theory, if that makes sense. So TA was very powerful for me. It changed my marriage. I suddenly saw all sorts of, the TAs about scripts, is that we react to things with past scripts, and it's all about saying, well, how do I react in the now, in the present? It's about mindfulness. And it's just a very powerful modality. There are many modalities out of there. It's just the one I've gravitated to, and I think it's the best.
So my question to you is, when you use the sentiment of, is this going to move this relationship forward? Where does small talk fit into that? Because one of the things, I was watching a TV program, and the psychologist in the show is sitting in the car with someone, and she's completely dead quiet, and the driver with her starts trying to make conversation, and she looks at him and she says, "Do you try and fill quiet spaces because you're awkward with yourself?" I was like, it's such an interesting perspective, because sometimes people do, they because they're awkward, they don't know what to do with silence. They try and small talk it. But then again, it's like, do you want to transact because you are moving a relationship forward, or you want to at least leave a lasting impression? Is that the case?
It's an interesting question. It's because small talk is important because it builds rapport. We all know that. So essentially, I use small talk, and you've seen me in action in the training room, is I start off with small talk. And it's not a way of getting people to kind of just kind of chat, but it's really a way of assessing what's in front of me. So I think small talk can be incredibly valuable if it's used in and only when it's necessary. Like, we like some relationships we don't need to move forward. Some relationships are, there's someone standing next to you at the till and you turn and say, hey, how are you? Da, 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 and off you go. But for some people in a working relationship, you don't want to necessarily go straight to task. You want to first kind of ease the person in with some kind of small talk, or just some kind of building rapport, but also just to make sure that the person's ready to receive what you want to offer them in whatever reason you're wanting to move the relationship or the business forward. So I think that that's what's really important about it. But silence is also a transaction.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So for some people, they can hold space in silence, and they can hold the awkwardness of just waiting for someone to respond. I'm not one of those people. I will fill a gap.
I'm exactly the opposite of you. I'm completely, because I watch you, and I can step into the role of trainer and do that. But when I'm not doing that, I completely step out of the role, and I don't need to have small talk. I don't need to chat, and like I'm completely happy to be quiet. And that's why
You're strange, Kevin. That's what it
it's
is. No.
best explanation I've come across. So
Yeah, and I think it's a balance of both, because we gravitate to certain things, and TA talks about that. So we gravitate to certain ways of operating in the world based on our past scripts. I know for me that that silence wasn't necessarily didn't feel like a good thing in my world. So I suppose that's why I feel it. Whereas you've grown up with the fact that silence is something you can hold in their space. But sometimes the most powerful question is just keep it quiet. I mean, you would know as a coach, sometimes we just sit there and the person just goes even further. So I really respect that that's something you can do, but I think it is a bit of both, and it's about knowing when both are required. So in terms of my salespeople, for example, when I work with them, I speak very much about learning the art of small talk, because that's a lot of what it's about, is that relationship building, asking questions, finding out who you are. But for some people, that's just not how they're wired.
And I think that's the point of the analysis part, right? And that's where, when you're transacting, how are you analyzing what it is you're transacting about? Because when you're building rapport from a sales position, small talk is really great, because you need to, if someone mentions the rugby, or if someone mentions a car that they like driving, and you're like, I love that car, or whatever that is, from a sales perspective, it works really well. But I think it's the cognizance of understanding, when to use it, how to use it, and how to use it as a tool, because I think it can be quite useful. But in cases like you just mentioned, silence can also be a part of transacting. But I mean, how does it get used organizationally? Let's chat about that from an organizational perspective.
Okay, so organizational TA it's a certification that you can kind of focus on specifically, where you become a certified transactional analyst working within organizations. And that takes a number of years to get, but means nothing unless you're in the TA world to other people. But it's a hugely significant qualification. And organizationally, how it's used is it's used to shift structure, relationships, and culture within an organization. And it depends on what's needed in what modalities of transactional analysis, or what frameworks you will call upon. But basically, what Eric Burns said is that all organizations have a parent, adult, and a child, and they form the parent, for example, is the etiquette. It's the way things have to be done, your dress codes, those kind of things. The adult, the day-to-day tasks, how we do them. The child is in terms of the characteristics. So what are we allowed to do to have fun, those kind of things. So he built up around an organization, the fact that we could build a culture based on these ego states. It's since been taken further, and we talk about all sorts of things like imagos and how a business can actually be mapped if you're looking at culture stuff. The way I use it organizationally is I use it with leaders in terms of learning how to deal with situations relationally that are going to, as I always say, move the relationship and the business forward, which means learning to use what's called the integrating adult, which is the integrating adult. And it used to be that TA was all about you had to be an adult, whatever that meant. But the integrating adult is that you decide what the response is going to be and from what area. Are you going to give somebody a parental instruction, and in which case are you doing it because it's decided, or are you doing it because of past script behavior and this person has made you feel like they're a child, whatever it is. But what we do is we learn to recognize that how we move conversations forward is to respond to them, but to respond by what's in front of us. So I can't change the way you're talking to me, but I can shift how I'm transacting with you so that the transactions can be done differently. And this can work powerfully in a leadership space. It can work powerfully in a group space and getting the group to interact differently. But it's also in terms of moving culture along. It can be incredibly powerful in terms of looking at, because Bern also spoke about the different leaders. You have the effective leader, who's the person who's who kind of like has to get everything done. The responsible leader, which is often like the CEO. But every organization has as well, or team has a psychological leader. And that's often not the effective or the responsible leader. That's the one forming the WhatsApp group saying, how awful is this company? And they're leading the team psychologically. And so what it is about identifying those psychological leaders and shifting culture so that all three leaders are speaking the same language and transacting in a way that's moving the business forward. It's about responding versus reacting, but it's also about being able to place all of this within a kind of framework and a model to work with so that people can see it visually. Bern said, if you can't draw it, it's not TA. So, it has to be, they're very visual ways of creating relationships, dynamic structures within an organization, and does various things from breaking silos, increasing boundaries, whatever it may be. An organizational transactional analyst will go in and fill the brief based on the frameworks they work with. I use it mostly in relationship, though, in terms of how leaders deal with their people, with each other, and those leading them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just looking at, and you've seen with the work that I do, the work that we do, the program that we work on together, and that's why it becomes such a wonderful tool, because part of what I see that works very often is that I step into parent very often, in a group of people, but very quickly adjust to becoming a nurturing parent. And a critical parent can, show its head very, very quickly, but the ability to switch from critical to nurturing is also, it becomes a practice, right? And then also how quickly you need to get back to adult, to be able to really find a neutral, agreeable place to speak about difficult things. But I mean, don't you want to just unpack that for us? I know that you've got a list of questions here.
No, you told me to send those through.
Parent, adult, and child. Don't you want to just unpack those?
I was very impressed. You've listened when we've worked together to all my nurturing parent and talk. So basically, the way what TA is known for is the development of ego states, but it is a lot more than that. And what the ego state basically says is that we have within us a parent, an adult, and a child ego state. The parent is learned behavior. So this is behavior we've learned in how to guide other people. And it's either the critical parent, where we sometimes learn to guide people by by being boundary setting, by having critical conversations, by being, judging, but not necessarily unhealthy judging. But the critical parent can demonstrate unhealthily as well. Nurturing parent is looking after, supporting, tending to other people, caring for them. At its unhealthiest, it's rescuing rather than helping people. The adult is the here and now. So Byrne said that's when we're in the here and now. So we're sitting here right now. It's where I'm looking at you, Kevin, and I'm not thinking, Kevin reminds me of my gran who I used to hate, and therefore I'm not going to be nice to Kevin. So,
but at least your brain was attractive. I must say.
Yeah. Hey, turn your camera on. Let's see. So the adult is the here and now behavior. It's where we're responding to the here and now, and we're responding in problem solving, accounting, rational. It's where emotional intelligence sits. Child behavior is also learned behavior, but this is how we learned to respond to being parented. It's how we learn to express ourselves in the world. So we have what is called the free or natural child, which is almost like what we were born with. And then we have the adapted part of us, which is how we've learned to be nice to people. We've learned to be team players. We've learned to adapt so that we can cooperate. But sometimes we go into unhealthy modes in terms of being submissive, or we might go into the free child, be a bit reckless, and kind of do stuff without thinking about consequences. So they all have healthy and unhealthy. And in functional fluency, which is a branch of TA that I work with, we call them modes. And there's effective and ineffective modes of behavior that we can slip into. So where it's interesting is functional fluency uses a profiling system to tell you where you kind of slip into, like, do you slip into ineffective parent modes, for example? Is that part of your tendency? And where your energy is spent kind of almost incorrectly in those modes. But what we want to do in transactional analysis is we want, ideally, the organization to operate from a space where people are choosing which ego state to go into. So when you're saying, for example, that, there's the nurturing, but you can go into critical, that's important. We can't be one ego state. Sometimes someone needs a parent. But if someone says to me, what is the time? That's an adult question. I can respond with a parent because that reminds me of something that, I used to always get into trouble for not being, kind of having my own stuff. So as my learned behavior is, I say to the person, well, it's about time you bought yourself a watch. And then what I'm going to do is get a child response to that, where someone says, just tell me the time. We're like, well, I don't understand. And then, you've got the wrong kind of transactions happening because it was a reaction versus a response. Whereas to choose to respond in that situation might say that, listen, absolutely, but where is your watch? Because I'm worried you're going to run late for the next meeting. So I'm still bringing in the parent, but it's a thought through. It's a choice to go into the parent mode because I believe that the person can receive it without going into an ineffective child mode. So it's about choosing what ego state to be in when. And there's certain times where, for example, we spoke about me being funny. So I do use quite a bit of humor, but it sometimes backfires on me completely. That's the free child space. Because some people just can't relate to a free child space. They don't see it as adults. Yeah. It must be, we're at work, we must be serious. So I need to then shift my free child and go into a more, and choose not to rely on that, even though it's one of the tricks I have in training. I've got to then choose and say, okay, I can't just keep doing that behavior. I've got to shift because of what's in front of me.
But like a wonderful, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but a wonderful example of what you've done that I've noticed you've done is you brought up in that casual connecting and building rapport, you used the words penis and phallus in front of an audience, and they were like some of them weren't sure, but you also could gauge from that response like who you're dealing with, right? Yeah. And the fact that you sort of unpacked that for them, they understood it eventually.
Yeah,
it's just a great tactic. But don't you want to
I just want to qualify that. So in terms of it, so why I do that, for example, is to show that people respond from different ego states. So some people, when I say, because we were talking about labello being phallic.
Yeah, we were talking about
Yes, yeah. It was just and I did it in a joke, but what I wanted to do was I wanted to show how my free child created either a parental response, a
Yeah.
critical parent response in some people. So some people saw it as I crossed a line
Yeah.
and that was bad. Some people free childed with me and they were absolutely fine. And some people were in adult when were like, actually, yeah, it does look like a phallus. Interesting. And let's move on. So it was you use that kind of example just to show how ego states create reactions and different ego states in other people.
And just to clarify with the scripting, that could be your scripting. So you could, if you're reacting from a parent position, that could be part of your scripting. Like, so in the past, that's something that's not how we speak when we do business. But from a child's response, is like, oh wow, I can't believe you just said that. Like, that is so funny, like, and that could also be part of your scripting. So it's so would it be fair then to say that using TA correctly and functionally and as an effective tool, you're actually you're using you're responding to conversations more than reactions. It's actively cognitively responding.
Yeah, so that's why I like functional fluency. So it was developed by Susanna Temple in the 90s, and she created a TIFF profile and got a PhD in this. And basically, what it is functional fluency. So the ego state is how we function. There's functional ego states. And what she does was she used TA, made it less TA, so it was a bit more accessible to kind of people who didn't necessarily want TA theory, but it speaks about how we need to become fluent in the ego states.
Yeah.
And it's about practicing that fluency like a language, that I can start saying, okay, this I've created, like if I said something to you that offended you now, I could see that I've created that. So what's the next step to go into so that we can resolve it if we want to resolve it? I mean, sometimes you don't, it's not like I'm not saying that we have to all walk around being nice to each other, but what is going to be the best way to respond fluently? It might not get the response I want, but it's a decision that I make rather than letting it escalate where someone says, you should have a watch. I don't have a watch. Go get some. And then eventually you've got two children fighting in a room. It's about saying, how can I be fluent with my emotions to choose what I want to say next? So it's about that response part. Is so important. The fluency I love. I love that idea of being fluent in TA.
What are the other models or modalities that influence organizations and leadership work? What do we attach to this? Because immediately my brain does a lot of like NLP and neuroscience and all of that stuff. But I mean, like, what else is there that sort of works well with this?
So TA works well with anything because so for example, there's a lot of TA certified transactional analysts who work with NLP as you do.
Yeah.
One of the ways to become a certified transactional analyst is that you have to be able to show how TA works with other modalities. So I work a lot with the enneagram, and I think you do as well. So I work a lot with the enneagram, and the enneagram is a great way to build self-awareness. And it's a great way to kind of launch. I don't use the enneagram to do team dynamics stuff. I then go into TA using the enneagram, saying, now that we're self-aware, I know that you're a type 7, if I'm correct. If you're a type 7, I know that there's certain ways that I can interact with you that will perhaps move the relationship forward. But I can also perhaps understand why you might not want to go into some areas that you don't go into. It still doesn't give you the permission to behave badly, in any of these things. But the enneagram is very nice, and the enneagram speaks about that we all come from a place of things. It's nature and nurture. So things have happened about how we show up in the world, and so we show up in the world looking for recognition, for example, for the 2s, 3s, and 4s. And in transactional analysis, Byrne speaks about the human hungers. and that's recognition. He talks about structure, which is where the 8, 9, and 1 sit. They want, like, everything must have its box. The 7, 6, and 5 want stimulus, knowledge, kind of to go bungee jumping, those kind of things. So it fits in quite well in terms of being able to give those modalities, which sometimes when I use the Enneagram, people think it's a bit woo-woo, which it's not at all. But when you bring it in with a psychological modality, it can be incredibly powerful because it shows just how psychologically we work. I also use a lot, so I've worked with Inner Life Skills, and I think Inner Life Skills, so I've trained with them to go up to my master coaching, and I use a lot of what they teach in terms of that people have the wisdom within themselves, which is a TA thing of saying, I'm okay, you're okay. And we always work from a case of no one is, and I've got to recognize if I'm saying I'm okay and you're not okay, and that's giving advice when I don't need to give advice. The person can find out within themselves. So they all relate to each other in terms of TA. Just what TA does is gives it a nice modality and a nice framework to be able to couch these things in.
I love it. And I love that, I'm okay, you're okay sentiment. And it's not a sentiment, it's sort of a belief that TA sort of underpins, because essentially when we come from that perspective, like we can actually get to an adult state where, even if we're disagreeing, even if we're on two different pages, on two different planets, I think, speak of two different planets. If we look at the world and the wars happening in the world right now, it's I think ego is so enforced and in play in the world right now. If we look at American politics, I watch American politics because it's so funny, but how the egos are at play, and you kind of go, until you get to a position where people are actually engaging at an adult sort of stage with each other, the rest of it becomes really tricky, because you have to then be like really expert at navigating how to deal and not be reactive in terms of how you're dealing with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add to what you're saying, so in terms of the I'm okay, you're not okay space, wars are fought when we've got one party sitting in I'm okay, you're not okay, and the other party sitting in I'm okay, you're not okay. We're seeing it in the discussions in America with traditional values, and some people believe they've got what religion is about, and other people say, but this is what my religion says. And if we can get to a place of saying, you're allowed to say that, like, I don't mind. If you want to believe that transness is wrong, go for it. But I'm okay to think that it's okay. And we can meet at a level to talk about it in terms of saying, this is just our various ways of seeing things, but none of them are prescriptive in the world, because we're both okay. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And organizationally, it's incredibly powerful to teach people to operate from a space of saying, when you're going in and asking your manager for stuff, it's from it. They don't have it. They're not better than you. It's just, they might know more in that area, but it's the okayness is a leveling. It's an equal to position that I think is very important. It's also very powerful in training. I always go in as a trainer and say, I'm not coming in to say, I'm okay, you're not okay, therefore I'm coming to train you on TA. I'm coming in basically because they are okay, and I want to add to their tools of okayness.
Yeah.
I think that's, if the world thought a little bit more like that, I think we'd live in a bit of a nicer place.
I mean, that's what I've done with, the unconscious bias training that I created. Was it very much speaks to just finding an equal playing field and kind of going, okay, cool. Now that you know that everyone has a bias because you have a brain, let's unpack that and kind of go, okay, cool. Are you noticing that you potentially have this bias, or you have this bias? And it's okay to have bias because it's your brain's way of making sense of reality. So when you really just unpack it to that degree, it's really speaking from adult to adult, and I'm okay, you're okay, we're all okay if we just sat down and took the time to not be reactive and rather be responsive. To end today's conversation, how do we incorporate TA principles into our lives, or into our relationships, into our organizations? Can you give us 5 tips?
Wow. Jeez, Kevin, this is you're not paying me enough for that. Well, let me think of just some. So I think the first thing in terms of TA is to realize is the most powerful statement is I'm okay, you're okay. The concept of okayness was, a lot of people have kind of made it kind of sound infantilized or but it is a very powerful philosophy. And if I can go into a relationship and say, Kevin, you're okay, like even in like an HR space, so often we go in saying you're not okay as a person. People feel like that from HR policies, whereas HR policies should be directed at saying you're okay, just sometimes people do bad things or silly things, and they need to just, so their behavior is what I need to correct. So I think that that's one of the most powerful things, is to realize is that we can shift people's behavior, we can make them aware of people's behavior, but we must never allow them to walk away feeling like their okayness has been questioned by us, because then immediately the relationship is damaged. And I think that we see that quite a lot. The other way is that the power to choose your response, and to realize that sometimes because it's how I think I want to respond doesn't mean that it's the correct response. The correct response is always one that's asking, what's going to be the consequence of me saying this?
Yeah.
And is it going to move the relationship forward? And I think the third one is just where TA can be so powerful, is it helps you understand where other people are coming from. So just to give you an example in terms of script and past script, my husband always comes home late from work, and I cannot bear it. I'm a child. If you watch my TED talk, I have huge abandonment issues. So I see him coming home late as abandoning me. I had to realize that was a childhood script, and I was responding to him as a child. For him, he was responding to say, like, it was an adult thing. At least he was home, And so I had to then realize and become self-aware to say, he's not doing it to evoke this feeling in me. This feeling is a learned feeling, but it doesn't mean it's the script I have to put onto the situation. Getting into the adult and the here and now says, okay, how do him and I contract? And you've heard me speaking a lot about contracting. How do him and I contract so that now he sends me a WhatsApp just to say running late, because then, I feel at least contained. But we had to work out a way of saying, just because I want to react that way actually isn't this reality. The reality is that two of our major parts of our egos in terms of the states are all reacting to past behavior. So I think that's 3, huh?
Yeah, that's me. That's fine. That's perfect. And just to add, like, I love that, because from a human behaviors perspective, brains love structure and strategy. And the moment you give it some kind of structure and there's a strategy to influence that, you create a bit of certainty for your brain, because brains don't like uncertainty. So when there's certainty, it's such a beautiful way of putting that together. So I mean, Clive, tell us, where do we get hold of you? Where can people reach you? And what's the best place to go?
So my website is always a good start. So I've got www.readypeople.co.za. My email address is clive@readypeople.co.za. But I'm all over the internet. You can just Google me and I'll come up, and you'll be able to find me. But yeah, it's Ready People's the easiest.
Fantastic. Guys, that's Clive Vanderwagen. He is the owner of Ready People. And if you want to go and check it out, it's going to be out on YouTube and all your major podcast channels. So go and check us out, where we have loads of fun. You can see how we look and and enjoy that. Clive, have a fantastic day, and I will chat to you soon.
Cool. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Cheers for now. Bye.
Bye.